Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today, we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 31st January 2018. Now let us begin. Now from page 1, the first news we would be analyzing is about the impeachment of a High Court judge. Now the Chief Justice of India has recommended the removal of a High Court judge through a letter to the Prime Minister of India. Now let us understand the impeachment process of a High Court judge from your prelims and your mains perspective. And let us understand this with the help of the Constitution of India itself. Now the impeachment procedure for a High Court judge has been provided under Article 2017, Part 1, Part B. Now it states that a judge may be removed from his office by the President of India in the manner as for the removal of a judge of a Supreme Court, which is given under Article 124, Part 4. So hopefully up till here, you have understood that under which article does the impeachment of a High Court judge falls. Now let us understand about Article 124, Clause 4. Now Article 124, Part 4 gives the procedure of the impeachment of a judge of a Supreme Court. Now to begin the impeachment procedure in the Parliament, a resolution has to be introduced. Now this resolution has to be introduced either by 100 members of the Lok Sabha or either by 50 members of the Rajya Sabha. Now after this, a discussion is held in the Parliament, and if the Parliament collectively decides to impeach the judge of the Supreme Court, the resolution has to be supported by a majority of the total membership of that House and by a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of that House present in voting. Now if the resolution has been passed, it has to be presented to the President in the same session for the President's approval. Now hopefully up till here you have understood as to under which article does the impeachment of a Supreme Court judge falls, how a resolution to impeach a Supreme Court judge is introduced, and what are the specific conditions for the impeachment of a Supreme Court judge. So if a question is asked in your prelims examination, such as which of the following statements are correct, you can answer from the information given in this section. Similarly, a question was asked in the mains examination of 2004 with regards to on how can a judge of the Supreme Court be removed. So with the explanation given in this section, you can also answer on how can a judge of the High Court be removed if it is asked in your mains examination. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from the editorial page on page 9. Now let us understand this article with each specific topic that each question have raised. Now the first topic in a question that has been raised in this article is about the rising oil prices and its link with the reduction in excise duty. Now India is an importer of oil, and when oil prices rise, it increases the current account deficit of the Government of India. Now in simple terms, current account deficit is exports minus imports. Now as you know, India is an importer of oil, and as the oil prices rise, it increases the amount of money that is then spent on the import of oil, and thereby it increases our current account deficit. Similarly, as oil prices rise, it also increases inflation in India. And therefore, according to the Chief Economic Advisor, the Government of India has to take corrective action to maintain macroeconomic stability. So let's say, because of the rise in the oil prices, the Government of India decides to cut the excise duty. Then the Government of India is only considering the view of the consumer, since a reduction in the excise duty would decrease the price of petrol, diesel and other oil products. However, a cut in the excise duty also results in a fall in government's revenue. Since excise duty is a form of income for the Government of India, and if they reduce this duty, it would simultaneously decrease the revenue of the Government of India. And if there is a fall in the government's revenue, it might increase the fiscal deficit. And an increase in the fiscal deficit is not good from the government's perspective. So according to the Chief Economic Advisor, a balance has to be maintained between the consumer's perspective and the government's perspective. So hopefully up till here, you understand that increase in oil prices may lead to increase in the current account deficit. Further, an increase in oil prices leads to an increase in inflation. And to offset these increase in oil prices, if the Government of India cuts its excise duty, it decreases the retail price of petrol, diesel and other oil products, while it also decreases the government's revenue, which then further increases the fiscal deficit of the Government of India. So hopefully you have understood the reply of the Chief Economic Advisor to this question. Now let us move on to the second question. Now the second question is that the economic survey pointed out that a lot of people are putting their saving into equity. Now the Chief Economic Advisor has asked them to be extra cautious now. Let us understand why. Now since the rise in the stock market prices, many small investors have started putting their savings into equity funds. However, it should be realized that whenever the stock market rises beyond its normal levels, it also comes down. Therefore, the stock market is open to risks. Hence, according to the chief economic advisor, more vigilance is required. And this can be achieved through financial education of investors, and also SEBI should be more vigilant in regulating the stock market in order to protect the small investors. So hopefully you understand as to why the economic survey and the chief economic advisor have asked small investors to be cautious when investing in the stock market. Now let us understand the third question. Now the third question is regarding the recommendation of the economic survey and the chief economic advisor for a pause in government's fiscal consolidation. Now, according to the chief economic advisor, growth in India is reviving and also inflation is slowly rising. And therefore, he recommends that the government should be cautious about its expenditure and meeting its fiscal deficit target. Now, as we know that a rise in government's expenditure fuels inflation in the economy, and therefore the chief economic advisor advises for fiscal consolidation. Now, fiscal consolidation are policies that are undertaken by the government of India to reduce their deficits and debt stock. Moreover, the chief economic advisor has said that the government should refrain from adopting populist measures as it may lead in exceeding the fiscal deficit target. Now, populist measures such as farm loan waivers increase the expenditure of the government of India, which then increases the fiscal deficit for the government. And that is why the chief economic advisor has said that the government of India should avoid populist measures. Now, the fourth and the last topic that this article talks about. Now, the government of India has taken several steps to fix the structural issues in private investment. And the question asks about the nature of private investment. Now, the chief economic advisor has suggested that it is necessary to boost private investment in the economy. For this, he has suggested a supply side measure. Now, by supply side measure, it means the proper utilization of the existing capacity. So, let's say a company has the capacity to produce 100 cars, but currently it is only producing 80 cars. Now, the chief economic advisor is suggesting that the existing capacities that is there in the Indian economy, especially in the manufacturing sector, should be first utilized completely. Moreover, the chief economic advisor has suggested that the corporates should start investing more in the economy, and the banks should now start lending more. So hopefully up till here you have understood that the recommendation to boost private investment can be done through three steps. First is by improving the supply side measure. Second is by asking corporates to spend more in the Indian economy. And by third is to ensure that banks lend more. And these three steps would help in increasing the private participation and boost private investment. Now hopefully up till here you have understood the four questions that have been asked in this article, and you also understand the reply that the chief economic advisor has given to them. Now the lead editorial on page 8 also contains the same information. So what we would do is try to understand the information that has not been covered in this section and in yesterday's DNS, and therefore we move on to our next article. Now most of the information contained in the lead editorial has been covered in the yesterday's DNS. And certain information such as on the stock market or the oil prices has been covered in the previous section. So therefore, there would be two things that we would be analyzing from this article. First is the monetary policy of the US Federal Reserve and its impact on India. And the second topic we would be analyzing is about the domestic challenges that the author has highlighted that should be prioritized in the upcoming budget. Now let us understand the first point. Now the US Federal Reserve is now maintaining a tight monetary policy. It is doing so by reducing the money supply, by raising the interest rates. Now, this policy of the United States might lead to capital outflows from India. Now, the question is why? Now, when foreign interest rates are higher than domestic interest rates, then investors move their funds to foreign countries, which provide a better return on their investments. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood that the US Federal Reserve has decreased its money supply and increased its interest rates. Now, this may lead to capital outflows from India because the foreign interest rate gives better return than the domestic interest rate, and therefore the investors would move their capital outside from India. Now, these capital outflows would lead to a rupee depreciation. Now, this is because the demand for rupee has decreased in the foreign exchange markets compared to the dollar. Hence, rupee will depreciate. Now, hopefully, you also understand on how capital outflows might lead to a rupee depreciation. So, hopefully, you have understood the impact of the US federal monetary policy on the Indian economy. Now, let us understand the domestic challenges that the author has highlighted that should be prioritized in the upcoming budget. Now the author has highlighted 5 priorities for the upcoming budget. Now let us understand the priorities themselves and let us wait for the budget on how it addresses these 5 domestic challenges. Now the 5 domestic challenges that the author has highlighted. First is job creation, second is revival of private investment spending, which we also discussed in the previous section. The third point is the revival of exports. The fourth point is the rural and agricultural distress. And the fifth point is the revival of the banking sector. But let us wait for the budget to come and see on how it addresses these 5 challenges. So now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 8. Now let us understand what the author means by the term balancing act, and moreover let us understand what is the to-do list to improve India-ASEAN relations. Now the author is recommending that India establish itself as a balancing actor in Southeast Asia. Now the question is, why should India become a balancer in Southeast Asia? Now in the answer to this question, the author has given 4 reasons. Now the first reason given by the author is that India has been invited by the ASEAN leaders themselves. And during the recent summit, several ASEAN leaders and also in the joint statement between India and ASEAN, they have asked India for help in forming Southeast Asia as an open, balanced and inclusive region. Now this balancing act has been asked due to the rise of China, which is also author's second point. Now China has increased its aggressive postures in South China Sea, and therefore the ASEAN nations have asked India to act as a balancer to China in Southeast Asia. Now India has not asked the Southeast Asian nations to aid India in balancing China in South Asia, such as in the recent Doklam crisis. Now the third reason given by the author is that there has been 2 different pivots of the United States. The first one is that Donald Trump has not given importance to the priorities of the ASEAN nations. And moreover, the United States has extended to the quadrilateral group that includes India, Australia and Japan to get further involved in Southeast Asia. And since India is considered as one of the members of this quadrilateral group, it should therefore act as a balancing actor in Southeast Asia. Now the fourth reason given by the author is that India has extended its eastern neighborhood that includes Bangladesh and Myanmar to include Southeast Asian nations such as through the BIMSTEC, Trilateral Highway, Mekong-Ganga Cooperation and through other measures. Now hopefully up till here you have understood as to what the author means by the term balancing act. Moreover, you also understand as to why India should become a balancing actor in Southeast Asia. Now let us understand as to what the author means in terms of steps that are in the to-do list to improve India-ASEAN relations. Now the first step that the author recommends is that ASEAN nations should engage with the quadrilateral group. According to the author, India can lead in ensuring that ASEAN nations and the quadrilateral group engage in the common security issues with regards to Southeast Asia. Now the second step that the author recommends is that India should ensure better connectivity. And India can ensure better connectivity by completing the trilateral highway between India, Myanmar and Thailand and can further extend it to Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam and other Southeast Asian nations. And moreover, India should also establish air connectivity between Indian metro towns such as Bangalore, Hyderabad and other cities with the major capitals of the ASEAN nations. The third step that the author recommends that India and ASEAN nations should conclude the RCEP negotiations. The fourth point that the author makes is that India should increase its naval presence and naval cooperation with ASEAN nations. And the fifth and the last point that the author makes is for India and ASEAN nations to improve moral connectivity. Now this is a new term and has been used by an ASEAN leader, and what it basically means is to increase people-to-people contact. Now hopefully up till here you have understood the 5 steps that the author has recommended to improve India-ASEAN relations. Now this question was asked in the mains examination of 2009. Now what this question talks about is India's strategic interest in South Asia. So if a question is asked in your UPSC mains examination with regards to India's strategic interest in Southeast Asia, you would be able to answer with the explanation given in this section. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this article from page 10. Now let us first understand as to why is it in the news. Now recently a petition was filed in the Madras High Court which had asked the court to direct the centre to refer the human rights violations committed by the Sri Lankan Navy against Indian fishermen to the International Court of Justice. Now in the counter affidavit, the centre has told the Madras High Court that there is no treaty between India and Sri Lanka which grants the International Court of Justice jurisdiction in this affair. And second, that the conduct of the foreign policy of a country is an executive function and is not under the purview of Article 226, which is the writ jurisdiction of the High Court. Now this news is currently in transition and is also sub judice. So what we'll do from your mains examination, we'll understand what is the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Now I had covered the International Court of Justice in the December edition of the Focus magazine. And this Focus article was referenced to the election of Dalveer Bhandari as a judge on the International Court of Justice. Now the International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, and ICJ has a dual role. Now the first role is to settle legal disputes between states that are submitted to the International Court of Justice. And the second function that it performs is giving advisory opinions on legal matters referred to it by authorized United Nations organs and specialized agencies. Now, only United Nations member states are eligible to appear before the court. Also, ICJ cannot deal with a dispute on its own motion, meaning that the International Court of Justice is not permitted to investigate on acts of sovereign state as it chooses. Moreover, the states concerned must accept the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and must provide consent to the court for considering the dispute in question. So as you may know, in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, India and Pakistan accepted the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and provided consent to the court for considering the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. Now the International Court of Justice does not have jurisdiction beyond states. So it cannot deal with applications from individuals, NGOs, corporations, or any other private entity. Neither it provides them with legal counseling. So like in the case of the Indian fishermen, the petitioner cannot have gone straight to the International Court of Justice. And it is only the Government of India that can take up the case of one of its national and invoke a case against another state. Now the judgments of the International Courts of Justice is binding upon the parties. So hopefully up till here, you have understood 7 points with regards to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Now the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice becomes important for your mains or prelims examination because of the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. And these 7 are very straightforward points which you can refer if a question is asked with regards to it. Now you can further refer to the December edition of the Focus magazine to understand on how judges are selected in the International Court, on how was Justice Dalveer Bhandari elected, the international impact of his election, and moreover, you can refer to the differences between the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Code. Now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's paper. Now let's move on to the question for today.